Morning, everyone. I don't know why my voice was shaking for that, probably because I just woke up, but I'm dedicating this video to exploring a very specific idea with you, and it's a lot of speculation, so I'll be upfront about that, but it's based on evidence, and I invite you to explore it. I invite you to be skeptical. I invite you not to take it at face value. Absolutely do not do that, but instead look into it. Look into it, and I believe that you will find that the things I relate to you make sense. So today we're going to talk about schismogenesis, the field of psychiatry, and the Church of Scientology. So these are seemingly three very different things that, in my view, are intimately related. So to start, if you're not familiar with schismogenesis, you can go back and look at some of my videos, but I'll just give a quick recap on what schismogenesis is and what it's all about. So let's recap that real briefly. So schismogenesis is a feedback loop. It's a feedback loop that is common to communication, and it was first discovered and described by Gregory Bateson back in the 1930s when the British were colonizing the world, and he was sent over to Papua New Guinea to study the Iatmu people. So this was a tribe in Papua New Guinea that was in effect very secluded, and when you think of a tribe, this is kind of what you probably think of in your mind. So the men in this tribe, Gregory Bateson discovered, tend to suffer from what we consider to be psychotic states. And the women in this tribe tend to suffer from what Gregory Bateson considered to be schizophrenic states. And then he went later on out west into Europe, and he studied this in mental institutions, and he studied schizophrenic patients. And it was his view that schismogenesis was the process, along with what he would later discover and describe with some colleagues of his as the double bind, which is a no-win situation. So that if you're caught in a no-win situation frequently, and they test on this on dolphins, that if you're caught in a double bind frequently, this can exacerbate all sorts of mental conditions. So he wasn't exactly clear on the intricacies of the connections involved and why this happened, but he was observing its effects nonetheless, and he was describing this. So not too long after Gregory Bateson discovered schismogenesis, the militaries in the West decided to weaponize it, to instead of promoting and creating societal awareness of what it is that most likely and was evidenced to promote these different mental conditions. So schismogenesis can provoke autism, it can provoke schizophrenia, psychopathy, ADHD, OCD, psychosis, bipolarity, and all of this depends on how the person deals with stress and their emotions. So you'll enter into one of those perceptual states depending on how you deal with the schismogenic stressors in front of you. So Gregory Bateson saw that this thing was provoking precisely what it did, and so did the military. And so instead of creating that public awareness, as I said, they decided to weaponize the phenomenon of schismogenesis. The Pentagon recently admitted to this in the winter of 2018, where they came out and stated, and I'll link you to the report, that America right now, and at least since 2016, has actively been under attack through schismogenesis by the Russians and the Chinese and other hostile actors. So, and then they admit to using schismogenesis in World War II against the Japanese. That's not the only time they used it. They haven't stopped using it. They didn't say, oh, this worked and stopped using it. They just don't want to admit to how they used it in foreign lands against populations, innocent populations, and how they've used it here at home. So if you haven't heard the word schismogenesis, it's because they want to keep it under wraps. So we are being attacked by a specific process that has specific effects on people's mental states, yet you have not heard a Democrat, you have not heard a Republican come out and say, hey guys, we're not just randomly being attacked by divisive forces. There is a specific process here that's taking place called schismogenesis, and it has effects on your mental states. So they don't want to relinquish this weapon. They don't want to relinquish it at all. And to come out and tell people the true nature of mental illness is to relinquish the weapon that can help them attack people's psychological states, and they're not going to do that. It's one or the other. So the field of psychiatry, in my view, was created purposely and specifically to divert attention away from the field of psychology, which in turn would have revealed these things over time. And the field of psychiatry is, in my view, again, this is speculation, so this is free inquiry and freedom of speech, and you take that as it is, and it is your responsibility to, if this interests you, not to believe it up front. I don't recommend that. I recommend looking into these subjects and taking a deep dive. So the psychiatry field, in my view, was created for the very specific purpose of being able to exploit schizophrenics, being able to exploit autistic people, although that wasn't a known diagnosis then, that wasn't a formal diagnosis, being able to exploit people that were going through different perceptual states and exploit the heightened intelligence that these states provoke as a consequence of the defensive mechanisms that come into effect. So at that same time, they wanted to hide the effects of schismogenesis, and field of psychiatry would allow them to do this by promoting the idea that all of these conditions are based on genetics. And the government for decades and decades and decades has been funding genetic studies, which is a complete red herring, and they know it, a complete red herring, and they know it, in order to have the public thinking, well, you know, it's got to be genetics. That's what these scientists are dedicating themselves to. But if you take a look at the thousands and thousands of studies that they've conducted, it's always correlations. They never say, hey, this specific gene is doing this, and this is what it happens. They don't know. It's complete guesswork. And that is not to say that the scientists conducting these studies, that the scientists themselves are up to something nefarious. Because if you see your colleagues approaching and tackling a problem in a specific way, and this is how you can get the research bucks, this is what you're going to be most inclined to follow. So this is at the upper echelons level where this is being conducted. Now, moving on to the aspect of Scientology, how that ties in, is that in order then not to have people attacking the field of psychiatry, they created a ridiculous religion that would hide many of the basics of the science of cybernetics through the diversionary tactic of the religion of Dianetics, which is what Scientology offers. Now, so Scientology mixes in concepts of cybernetics that then keep people away from wanting to look at it because it just feels embarrassing. It's the same thing as with, now we know that the Pentagon is releasing all this information on UFOs, whereas for decades and decades and decades, they've been promoting this idea that, whoever believes in that is ridiculous, there's nothing to this, it's all conspiracy theories, it's nothing that merits your attention. It's the very same concept. So with Dianetics, they have Dianetics and Scientologists attacking the field of psychiatry. So that then it seems, well, man, if these ridiculous people are attacking this field, this field has to be okay. But if you study psychiatry, and most of you know this, the history of abuses of psychiatry is disgusting. This is the most disgusting field in all of medicine. This is in modern times where they literally put ice picks of people's noses and destroyed their brain organs. This is a known fact where they practice electrical shock therapy, where you have young people, teenagers, children. You have entire cemeteries in mental institutions where you have people, kids, teenagers, people in their 20s, 30s, perfectly healthy people, physically dying. Why would that happen in such a setting? think through that. It's insane. Some of these places literally have their own cemeteries with hundreds and hundreds of bodies buried. These are people that were perfectly healthy otherwise. So you will hear some shocking stories if you look into the field of psychiatry. But when you have Tom Cruise, who makes a ridiculous case of it by associating himself with Scientology, well, then you don't want to associate yourself with that. So then you say, okay, this guy, maybe he's wrong about Adderall. If Tom Cruise is ridiculing the use of Adderall and Ritalin and all these drugs that you do not need, this is a field that is completely, it's a cartel. It's a cartel. This is no different than the cartels from Colombia, from Mexico, from wherever have you. This is the same thing. So you have an incentive structure built in that's very strong to keep this secret. So you have the weaponization of schismogenesis. The government doesn't want to give up schismogenesis. So in order to do that, it can't reveal the true causes of mental illness. So that's an incentive. You have the yearly multi-billion-dollar drug industry that doesn't want to lose its hold on their market. You have people who are affected by schismogenesis who themselves have come to believe this, and they will defend this tooth and nail. They will defend the government's position tooth and nail because they believe in the authority fallacy. You have then other people that specifically it doesn't serve their purpose as well if this becomes public knowledge, because much of the schismogenic stress that a lot of people that are autistic, that are schizophrenic, that are bipolar, that are ADHD, etc., a lot of this happens from their personal environments. So in some cases, a fraction, thankfully in my intuitive understanding of it, it's 15% and less of cases there is legitimate abuse that's going on, and then there's stress that happens as a function of fundamental attribution errors, as a function through the amplification of schismogenic interactions the person encounters in their environment, but it's less malicious, by worlds apart, less malicious. So I don't want you to think that every autistic person, every schizophrenic person, every person that suffers from any one of these perceptual states that do have their serious downsides. I don't want you thinking that they're all abused individuals. That's not the case. But obviously, it stands to reason that if you can experience stressors that are not a function of abuse, well, also abuse itself can produce stressors that would be schismogenic in nature. So they got a nice little trick going on to divert our attention. As a recap, they have psychiatry to divert attention from psychology, to divert attention then from the science of cybernetics and the effects of schismogenesis, and at the same time exploit individuals who are schizophrenic. You can see this history is clear. Look at the history of Ted Kaczynski. Look at MK Ultra. These are public files. This is released from our intelligence agencies themselves. This stuff is not make-believe. And you will see that patients were exploited on a regular. This is just a matter of fact and how they've been doing things. So I'm going to put that out there. I'm going to leave it there, and maybe we can continue the conversation in the comments.